How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good buddy, my co-host from the West Coast, Nick Norman. Nick, how you doing, man?
Doing well, Jack. Super stoked to be with you today. So much fun stuff to be talking about. Just went caroling this last weekend with my church. Had some lovely hot cocoa that I had a little left over of that I'm sipping this fine morning with you.
Nice.
So happy to be with you. Happy that the holidays are getting into full swing here. December definitely seems so crowded, though, with every single weekend, every single Saturday and Sunday feels like full of football and friends and family and events. And so happy to be able to cut some time out of my time to talk with you today, though. How are you doing, Jack?
I'm doing well, man. We are, like you said, in the full swing of December and what that means. So it's been good. Been a good time, and preparing for Christmas with our daughter, and her first Christmas is, super special. So we're doing well. So we're gonna be talking today about some NFL head coaching things. We're gonna talk about the highest highs of NFL head coaches and the lowest lows of NFL head coaches. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about the. Let's start with Coach of the Year. Let's start positive. With who we're liking for as a Coach of the Year candidates. So far this year, we are, I guess this last week was the last time that you could have a bye week, which means everyone has played 13 games at this point. And so, from here on out, every team is playing every week, which is always fun, especially as we get here to the end of these like divisional battles, and, you can see the way things play out that way. But Nick, who are you liking right now as your standouts for Coach of the Year?
So for me, Coach of the Year is not as fun of an award for me in that I feel like every single Coach of the Year race is more of what coach most surprised us, what team over exceeded expectations, rather than like, hey, who was the best team or who was the best coach, for example. So like Andy Reid, his team has one loss this year, and I doubt he'll win Coach of the Year. He's won many Super Bowls now and coached many great teams that he's done an amazing job. And I don't know that he has a single Coach of the Year at this point. Mm-hmm. But it seems like it's become a most surprising team as far as the head coach will get the award for biggest jump. So like an O'Connell with the Vikings, or like a Brian Dable with the Giants a couple of years ago when they made the playoffs and beat those Vikings. It feels like those kinds of teams that overexceed expectations win. And although they haven't overexceeded my expectations a bunch, because I had very high expectations for them, your Lions with Dan Campbell, I think the combination of just stepping on other teams' throats, the culture, the physicality, the toughness, fighting through adversity, being able to win these close, tough, grimy games, being able to blow out other terrible teams, being able to win throwing the ball, running the ball, playing tough defense with a gutted defensive linebacking core and defensive line. Yeah. I've been really impressed with him, and as a culture builder, I really respect him and think that this award could really be his this year. It's been super impressive to see. He's not somebody who's a coordinator with like a great offensive mind or defensive mind. He's built a culture, a toughness, seems like a tremendous leader that men respect. Like that's what you want in a head coach as far as somebody who's not coordinator scheming up plays. And he's done all of that and more. So very impressed with him. He'd be my pick thus far, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. I really, really think that the guy who deserves it, and I feel like he's a guy that deserves it nearly every year and doesn't get it, but I think it's Mike Tomlin. I mean, I think, like he's done this not having a losing season streak, basically since he took over. And I think this year was the biggest one that people were like, this has to come to an end, like this can't keep going. And it obviously has. I think this was the biggest, like, oh, well, like, look at the quarterback situation. We were all like, when he moved on from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson, we were all like, really? And it's worked wonders thus far. So I think just from like, part of it is like just a longevity like standpoint of like, he's still there. He's still with the Steelers. He's still doing great things with the Steelers. And again, never had a losing season. I get that the playoff wins, they haven't won a playoff game in 8 years, which is not great, but he's doing his thing. The Steelers are rolling. They are really in strong position right now to win that division. They have a 2-game lead on the Ravens, which they're playing 2 weeks from now, so there's a chance that Baltimore could get a game back. But still, like, they're well on their way to winning that division. He's he's coaching really, really well, making great decisions, making Russell Wilson. And I mean, he's not the offensive coordinator, but still making Russell Wilson, setting him up for the most success. We've seen a lot on this in-season Hard Knocks of some of the ways that he's coaching guys up and stuff like that. And I think that Mike Tomlin is well deserving of it this year. I think, like you said, because it has so much to do with expectations, I think that helps him more than Dan Campbell. The Lions went 12-5 last year. Sure, right now they're on pace to maybe lose one more game and go 15-2, right? But still, okay, that's an increase of 3 wins. The Steelers already have exceeded their win total from last year, and they still have 4 games to go. So I'm bought into what Mike Tomlin is doing. I'm bought into the Steelers, and I think Mike Tomlin deserves it.
Every single note you hit, Jack, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, it seems like we're both kissing a little bit of ass here, and that me picking your Lions head coach and you picking my Steelers head coach.
Yeah.
This wasn't coordinated at all. We did not tell each other who we were picking. But definitely every single note you hit, I feel like the decision, because he said basically the reports were out of Pittsburgh that he went Lone Ranger when selecting to go back to Russell Wilson. Saying everybody, the offensive coordinator, the team said to keep Justin in. He went Lone Ranger and made the decision, Russ is our starting quarterback. When Russ hadn't played in a single game all year and had a training camp cut short because of the calf injury. And going Lone Ranger on that decision, that has worked wonders. They became a legitimate offense. They've been averaging, since Russell stepped in, over 28 points a game, I believe. And this year they brought up their overall point total. Right now, per game, they're averaging 25 points per game. We haven't seen numbers like that since Killer Bees, Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Steelers, back in 2017-18, or back in 2018. That team was obviously super talented, a great O-line, great quarterback. And to be able to resurrect those numbers with this offensive roster that's not anywhere near as talented as that one, super impressive. Russell's been very impressive. Mike Tomlin putting everything all out there for him to make that decision. As you said, in-season Hard Knocks, I think the visibility of Hard Knocks as far as seeing his coaching is going to come into play here. Because all what you're seeing on social media about Hard Knocks is like, man, Mike Tomlin leading that room, having that energy, being the leader of men. Like, you want to play for that dude. And that's in a division that has Stefanski, who's a good coach, and John Harbaugh, who's a really good Super Bowl winning coach too. And Mike Tomlin, just the visibility and winning or leading the division right now, just as you've said, I feel like he's in a really good spot as far as he's over-exceeded expectations and in position to continue doing that.
Yep.
So I just completely agree with everything you're saying. I think Mike Tomlin's just a great coach. I think if the Steelers got rid of him, he'd be sniped up by somebody in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
There were reports that USC would have tried to offer him a position when Lincoln Riley was being hired on as their head coach, as far as instead of Lincoln. And it just seems like Mike Tomlin is the eye of many teams in college and the pros' hearts, and that they would all pick him up immediately. And I think that just reflects on a good, well-loved coach, and that's what you want in a team.
100%. Now, that makes me, want to ask, like, so we know how good Mike Tomlin is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know how consistent his teams are.
Mm-hmm.
But, you're looking at this 8-year drought of winning a playoff game. It's been this Super Bowl, or those, yeah, like 16 years, right? Since they won a Super Bowl. Or they won it in 2009. So yeah, 16
Yeah,
seasons
eight,
since they
nine.
won the Super Bowl.
Yes,
Right.
yes, you're
And
right.
so it's one of those things that I look at it and I think, and again, I'm not a Steelers fan, so you'd have a better perspective on this than I would. But I feel like you have to think like, okay, would you rather be that consistently good but not great ever? Or would you rather be great, win some championships, also have some seasons that you're really a dud, but like there's always that no, like we're going to get a championship, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think it's one of those things that, like, yes, he is the apple of everybody's eye. If the Steelers were to let him go, or if he were to decide he was moving on, everyone would want him. But at the same time, for as much as he's propelling the Steelers, and we look at the Steelers this year, and it's like their floor was like down here, and because of him, their floor is up here now. But
Mm-hmm.
is it also like their ceiling could be up here, but their ceiling is down here now as well? And like, how does that look? How does that feel for you as a Steelers fan, right? Like, it's like, okay, I mean, as not a Steelers fan, I look at it and I'm like, at this point, I feel like I'll believe it when I see it, like with the Steelers team when it comes to the playoffs, So how are you feeling about that?
I hear you. I personally feel like there are a couple of playoff losses that obviously stand out over the last decade and change that like the Steelers should have won some of these certain games and they lost these certain games. But especially in recent years, they've lost games in the playoffs that they should have lost. Last year, they played against the Bills, and Josh Allen and the Bills were by far the better team and should have won, and they did.
100%. Yeah.
Played the Chiefs in Big Ben's last year, 3 years ago now, technically, and they got smoked by that Chiefs team. They had a good defense in TJ Watt, but they should have got smoked by that Chiefs team. The Steelers barely snuck in. Big Ben didn't even expect to make the playoffs or be in the playoffs that year. He was saying bye to his home crowd in Pittsburgh and in Baltimore in that last game. He was like, okay, this is the end of my football career. And then they made the playoffs shockingly. Like, they should never have beaten that Chiefs team either, and they didn't. They got smoked, obviously. But the Tim Tebow year in 2011 that they lost to Tebow in the playoffs in Mile High, that definitely was a game that the Steelers should have won. That was obviously a busted coverage in overtime, just one play bang. But obviously, as we know, it's difficult to play in Mile High altitude. The Steelers were a far superior team as far as the regular season to Denver, but they didn't win the division that year. I believe the Bengals won the division that year. But the Steelers had like 11, 12 wins that year, lost the division, and Denver had like 9 wins that year.
Yeah.
The Steelers playing on the road, it was just tough, and that was a tough loss. I think 2017 and the Jaguars, when they lost to the Jaguars after their bye in the divisional round, I think that was obviously a really brutal loss. But that was also the year Ryan Shazier got injured and the linebacking core was just gutted. The defense was really struggling that year after that injury. Cam Hayward, obviously, TJ Watt was a rookie, and so he wasn't the TJ Watt we know now. Joe Hayden had just joined the team that August, I believe, and he didn't play all the games that year. Like, that wasn't a team that the defense was not what we know today as a Steelers defense. That was a defense that Leonard Fournette ran all over.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, in these last couple of years that Big Ben was playing, Big Ben threw a lot of picks, especially in the playoffs. And obviously, the one that you and I remember very clearly was the Cleveland playoff game, Big Ben crying at the end of that game. That was just a brutal offensive start and defensive start for that Steelers team. The ball being snapped over Big Ben's head by Marquise Pouncey, the touchdown there. the defense getting ran over by Nick Chubb, a couple of interceptions by Ben Early. To me, that kind of reflects a lack of preparation by Mike Tomlin, and that I do blame him for. But also, though, some of those things were definitely on the players. Big Ben throwing the pick six early in that game, the ball being snapped over Big Ben's head. Like, how do you blame those things on Tomlin? Like, that huge deficit they were at to start that game was absolutely brutal, and that was more of a players-oriented deficit that they were in than coaching. But I definitely think that they should have been prepared more for that game. That being said, I think, though, that this is the most complete Steelers roster, debatably, in over a decade, and that the only rosters that you can really compare to it as far as completeness, you're talking maybe 2017, maybe 2018. But 2017-18, after the Ryan Shazier injury, the defense took a huge step down. 2018, they didn't have Minka. TJ was still super young. 2017-18 was TJ's first and second year. He was not the defensive player of the year caliber player he is now. He wasn't the game wrecker that he is now. There weren't the level of corners or safety play anywhere near that back then. And that defense just wasn't good. But from the stretch from like 2011 to 2016, 17, the defenses were awful and the offenses were amazing. Then the stretch from 2019 to now, the defenses have been amazing and the offenses have been awful. But now this year, it seems like the offense is solid to good, and the defense is good to great. And so that level of balance and amazing special teams. The Steelers' special teams has produced the most points as far as points off of turnovers and points generally of any special teams unit in the league. They've done an insane job blocking kicks, recovering muff punts, forcing fumbles and turnovers on special teams. They've been incredible. And so as a three-phase team, I think that this Steelers team, they don't have a weakness that's exploitable. And so that's something that I love about the Steelers team, that it's not one unit carrying or dragging the others. This is definitely a holistic unit. That Russell Wilson, there were just reports today basically of, was it Cam Hayward? I think it was Cam Hayward who basically came out and said, Russell Wilson needed us, but we needed Russell too. Like, we needed each other. Russ on Denver was terrible, but the Steelers offense without Russ wasn't anywhere near as good. It's been a reciprocal relationship that everybody's grown together and gotten better together. And that emphasis on team and growing together without George Pickens this week, it feels like this Steelers team is becoming more of a team every single week. And so that's been super impressive. And I think if Mike Tomlin doesn't win a playoff game with this team this year, that will be a big disappointment. I don't think he'll be fired, but I think it'll be a disappointment. Definitely a pretty big disappointment with the catbird seat they're in. If they beat the Ravens, they win the division. Right. In weeks. They just win the division if they beat the Ravens. And so so they're there. They definitely are in a good spot to win it, though. 100%. Moving on a little bit with the low end as far as head coaches this year. Thus far, we've had 3 head coaches fire this year. We've got Robert Saleh, the Jets, firing him very early in the year. Dennis Allen on the Saints getting fired, and then Rizzi taking over. And Eberflus just a couple of weeks ago being fired after an absolute debacle on Thanksgiving that I'm sure you at least caught parts of that as far as the highlights. But so those head coaches have been fired. Typically on any given year, we have approximately 7, 8, 9 head coaches who are fired / switch over every year.
Yeah.
We have 3 thus far. If you look into the crystal ball a little bit, where are you feeling as far as other spots where you could see these head coaching vacancies open up? Are there any clear spots, anywhere you think that the owner could really pry their way in? Anything you see there as far as any other head coaching spots that could open up this year?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is Jacksonville with Doug Peterson. Part of me is like, it's not his fault, because things are just always weird in Jacksonville. Like, seriously, always. if you think about it, like he led them to a playoff win a few years back,
Mhm.
and a divisional title, right? So it's like I don't want to like just completely like throw him to the curb, like,
Mhm.
but I mean, it's bad, right? It's
Mhm.
really, really bad. Um, so I expect, sadly, I'm always the type, like, I'm never just like calling for a man's job,
Mhm.
like this, but I expect him to get fired this year, this off season. Also, I'm looking at two first year head coaches that I
Ooh,
get
wow.
fired.
Mhm.
One I think is more obvious than the other, and that's Antonio Pierce.
Mhm.
The Raiders are bad. There is no culture in that locker room whatsoever. It seemed, at least to me last year when they hired him, like it was like, hey, if we hire him, then we'll appease Devontae Adams a little bit.
Mhm.
But even still, Devontae Adams is gone. Tom Brady is now an owner there, and it's pretty clear that he's not tolerating the losing, and especially with him as the head coach. So I think he's going to get fired. Also, now this
Mm.
one is very, very interesting because there was a lot of weird contract stuff that was the reason he became the head coach,
Mhm.
and that's Gerard Mayo with the Patriots.
Yes, sir.
So I think when Bill Belichick was leaving, like, we'll go get Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel got fired. He is the guy. He's a Patriot, former player there, won Super Bowls there. Like, he is the guy. And then they hired Gerard Mayo, and we're all like, what? And we find out it was part of his contract. Like he was being set up as the next guy. In doing so, they didn't need to have open interviews. They didn't need to follow the Rooney Rule because they already had a plan in place. Um, but oh my gosh, it's a dumpster fire. It is so bad. Talk about another team where there is like no culture. There were reports after their most recent loss to the Dolphins that like there are players that are just like still like listening to music, goofing around, laughing in the locker room after, and it's like, dude, that was embarrassing. Like your team is embarrassing. What are you doing? On top of it, that Mike Vrabel is still available. He didn't get hired anywhere. And so if I'm Robert Kraft, I'm like, okay, we tried this. This was a mistake. Let's move on. Let's go get Mike and let's try this again. Now, again, there was weird contract stuff in play. That's the reason Mayo became the head coach. Not that that is the only reason. Like, not like he was holding something over Robert Kraft's head, but he's the current head coach. Like, largely to do with this situation, with his coaching that led to them putting that in as a clause into the contract. But still, that is why he got hired without there being open interviews. There's a chance that it's also part of his deal. Maybe he's just a master negotiator, and so he signed his deal as the head coach. And part of it is you can't fire me within the first however many years or whatever. But if the Patriots can, I think they would be foolish to not move on from him and go get Mike Vrabel, because I think that just makes the most sense.
I hear you there. I think one of my biggest issues with Gerard Mayo, I just looked at his resume. Obviously, he was a good football player.
Right.
But so he was in New England as a player from 2008 to 2015. And his coaching resume is inside linebackers coach from 2019 to 23 in New England, and then head coach this year. He's only played and coached in New England his whole career as a player and coach. It's only been there, it's only been under Bill Belichick. I think that if you're a defensive side of the ball coach, especially a head coach, you need a good offensive play caller. You need to develop a really good staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think considering if you're only a player in one spot, only a coach in one spot, I don't know that you develop the relationships to know who to pick out for offensive coordinator, how to fill out a staff that's not just New England dudes.
Yeah.
And so I think that part of Gerard Mayo's struggle would be like, hey, how does he pick out his offensive coordinator, his defensive staff, being able to support his young QB in Drake May? It
Mm-hmm.
feels like his relationships might be really limited, especially when it feels like there's this weird sense of, well, he just got given this job because of contract weird situation where he was the heir apparent. that, like, obviously there's a weird kind of air about it, but it almost feels like I don't really know who's necessarily in his corner outside of Robert Kraft. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know off the top of my head if they even have a general manager or any sorts of relationships with the media or with any other coaches or anything on any teams. It just really feels like he's kind of siloed and that he wouldn't really be able to put a lot around his young offense and team. Like, I don't really get where he would find, like, hey, this is my connection to get a good offensive line coach in here, because they need a good offensive line coach because their offensive line's terrible. They
Yeah.
need a good offensive coordinator because their offensive talent and coordination is dreadful. They need a lot of help on that side of the ball, and Gerard just doesn't have the skill set to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know that they'd fire him after 1 year. Robert Kraft, I don't see him doing that, but I think it's on the table.
I think it would be foolish for it to not be considered. Let's put it that way.
I hear.
Like, especially they're likely going to be in the Travis Hunter sweepstakes. Like,
Yep.
no, I as love or hate Deion Sanders and Coach Prime. Like, he is a culture guy, and so it's going to be really, really easy for your new star to get really disgruntled if the team isn't playing well and it feels like there's no direction, no motivation there. And so I think you have to at least consider it, or at least do what the Eagles did and be like, okay, the general manager and the owner are hiring your coordinators. Like, you clearly are in over your head here with that, at least the offensive coordinator. I I'm always nervous when you have guys that have a really small resume, don't have head coaching experience or even coordinator experience getting hired. It definitely makes me a little bit nervous, especially like, it's not like Mayo played for 15 years, right? He had a shorter playing career. It's not like he's coached, like you said, his coaching tenure as the inside linebackers coach. It's not like he's been around that long coaching. You think about, as opposed to Dan Campbell, for example, who twice became the interim head coach at places. He was the interim head coach in Miami. He was the interim head coach in New Orleans at one point. At least has a little bit of that experience. He's been around long enough that it's like, all right, you know what? Let's let this guy interview, and maybe we'll give him the shot. The other thing with Gerard Mayo is, it's not like, again, I don't want to disparage the man's name, but like, what competition did he have for this job? Also, like, it was already planned out. He is the succession plan, So yeah, so those are the teams that I'm like the most like, hello, we gotta we gotta be thinking about this. I think, unfortunately, Brian Daboll is on the hot seat, and I just think that's completely unfair to him. If you think about it, in his first year, he took the Giants to the playoffs and won a playoff game.
Yep.
After that year, they signed Daniel Jones, and so I mean, I'm sure there had to have been conversation with him about that, but also, if he's a head coach that is worthy of not getting fired, he had to have been like arguing like, hey, let's not do this, right? Because like, we know what Daniel Jones is. I'm sure that he wanted the Giants to keep Saquon Barkley. I'd be shocked if he was like, no, I'm okay with you guys moving on from him, right? I'm sure that was more of a, Joe Shane is like, hey, we might not be bringing him back. He's like, can we please try? And Joe Shane's like, I'll see what I can do, but no promises, right? So like, I think if you think about the fact that a couple of years ago he took that team to the playoffs and they won a playoff game, should be reason enough to keep him, because imagine if he had good offensive line and good quarterback play, and give him the chance to get that before deciding, no, you're the problem, right? So I think he is on the hot seat. I think there are a lot of people calling for his job. I really hope that he doesn't get fired, because I think that a lot of this does not have to do with him. It has to do with the higher ups and their decision making. I'd really, really love to see the Giants get a new GM and keep Dayball for a little bit, at least for the next season. Be like, all right, listen, because I don't know if this happens in the NFL. It happens in college all the time, that like an athletic director will walk in to the head coach's office and be like, all right, listen, I don't want to put too much pressure on you. I don't want to just tell you like, listen, you're done, but hey, we got to win 7 games this year, right? We need to see improvement, and so I'd love for that. They'll probably only end up winning 3 or 4 games at most this year. So maybe giving him one more year, be like, listen, 8 wins. We need 8 wins next year so we can keep seeing the trajectory and seeing your vision coming through. But he's a great head coach. He really, really is. I think if he gets fired, I hope that this season, this really bad season, where again Daniel Jones was probably the worst that he's been, doesn't have Saquon Barkley to make that look less bad anymore. I hope that other teams that are looking to hire head coaches like notice that, and imagine what he could do with Alvin Kamara in New Orleans, right? Like, imagine. I think that he would be a great option for the Bears if he gets fired also. So I hope he doesn't get fired, but I hope that if he does, his resume isn't stained and tainted by this year.
I think Dable would have been a pretty solid option for the Chargers if they hadn't hired Jim Harbaugh. I think a schemer, offensive guy who's able to like be tied at the hip with Justin Herbert, I think that would have been a pretty solid like hire for them too. I think Jim Harbaugh's an amazing hire for them, but I think Dable could have fit that kind of scheme as well. I agree with you that I think Dable could be blamed. I would just like, obviously we're just dudes with mics and cameras right now, but I feel like if we could confirm like what his opinions were about Daniel Jones before them signing him, if he pushed for them to sign him or not. Like if you pushed for them to sign him and this is what happened, you knew what you were getting yourself into, then maybe I weigh it differently. But if he was like, man, I just want to do what I can to win, I do whatever, Daniel Jones or anybody else, maybe then I'd weigh it a little bit differently as far as like, this wasn't his dude, this wasn't his QB. And so I just feel like those behind the scenes, what decisions were his, what decisions were Schoen's, what decisions were ownership's, and figuring out what slice of the pie goes to who. So
yeah.
The 2 last head coaches that I wanted to touch on today, Jack, that will be Sean McDermott and Nick Sirianni. Obviously, Sirianni's a bit more of a controversial head coach than Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott obviously leading the Bills to a really great regular season once again. And Sirianni leading the Eagles right now to another great season as well. It feels like these 2 head coaches obviously have super high expectations and that these teams need to win. Buffalo's been on the doorstep, it feels like, of a Super Bowl these last couple of years. They haven't been able to climb the mountain of the Chiefs. And Sirianni obviously made it to a Super Bowl against the Chiefs. But the disaster that was last year, especially down in Tampa Bay in the playoffs, where do you feel like we're at as far as these head coaches? Do you think they got a shot to get fired? I think obviously their teams are performing super well right now. But do you think that a disaster could be inbound or maybe a playoff just failure on McDermott's team's part? Where do you think those teams are at?
Yeah, I think between the 2 of them, I'm far more concerned about Sirianni. It was about this time last year that they had their collapse into the playoffs. If you look at their remaining schedule, they've got Pittsburgh this week, at Washington, hosting the Cowboys, and hosting the Giants. I see a world where they do lose those first 2 games. And then the question is, okay, does that spiral or does it not spiral? If it spirals, it's not good. If it doesn't spiral, then he might be okay. I think if you think about what's been happening in the locker room, AJ Brown's comments after this last game, like Jeff Saturday was comparing it to the Lions, and he made such a good point. It's like, oh, you're not getting the ball very much. Jeff Saturday was like, look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had like 4 receptions on Thursday night's game, but you know what? He was blocking the piss out of people, and he doesn't care if he's not catching the ball as much because they're winning. And so what does that say about what the head coach is doing? What does that say about the locker room? That even in a win that was a trap game, like, was it bad? Are we a little nervous about how close the Panthers came to beating them? Yes. But if you look at it, I would call it a trap game. And so when you can escape trap games with a win, then I do look at that as like a solid. Even if it is a team that it's like you should beat them, right? So, but that being said, like, there's obviously some discourse that's happening in the locker room. It obviously happened last year. It's happening again. At what point do you, like, if you're Howie Roseman, if you're ownership, do you go like, we might need to change things here? At this point, I wonder, like, what does he bring to that locker room, right? Because, like, Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator. Offense is playing great. And play caller. Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator and play caller. Defense is playing great. Sirianni didn't hire either of those guys. They were hired from the higher ups. So, like, what advantage is he giving you that other teams don't have? Unless the advantage that he's giving you is making terrible decisions about when to go for 2, when to go for it on 4th down, and when to challenge. I don't see what he's bringing to the table. And so that's where, similar to what I was saying about Tomlin, but nowhere near as, his accolades and what he does bring to the table is nowhere near as high as Tomlin. Like, you look at it, you're like, okay, if this is just kind of where we're at, as we're always a pretty good football team, but we're never getting over the hump, and you're not doing anything to help us try to get over the hump. We're not seeing any way that you are getting us closer than someone else might. Yeah, the Eagles might make a decision there, and I wouldn't blame them if they did. McDermott is different. I think that he's a little bit safer. I think that part of the thing that we're seeing, I think it definitely depends on what happens in the playoffs. If it's an absolute collapse, well, that might be a little different. But looking at them this year, or looking at his body of work so far, he's done a very good job with this Bills team, despite not having the best Josh Allen possible until this year, right? And so now they have the best Josh Allen possible this year, and the Bills have already clinched the division. They're 10-3. They probably are going to be slotted in the 2 or 3 seed, which means they'll probably be playing either the Broncos or the Chargers at home in the playoffs in Buffalo, lake effect snow, all of that in January. I think if they lose that game, then questions start getting asked. I think if they win that one, then we'll see. Like you said, this is a very different Steelers team this year than in the past. And so this is a Steelers team that I feel like is more like that team that won their last playoff game against the Alex Smith Chiefs, where this is a Steelers team that if you lose to, it's not like you lost to that Steelers team in the playoffs. It's more of a like, listen, this is a good Steelers team that you lost to. And so I see a world where the Bills like lose in the divisional round to the Steelers, let's say, but they're still safe. Or McDermott is still safe just because of those circumstances. It would be hard because, like, dude, look at what you've got. But I think we also need to remember with McDermott, like, this was supposed to be the Bills' down year, right? And so if you think about it, management, everyone, the whole league is preparing. This is going to be the Bills' down year. And so the fact that they have won the division as early as they have, are going to be in the playoffs. I think if they get to a divisional game, I think management can be like, you did one heck of a job with this team that was supposed to be like the Jets or the Dolphins might actually beat us for the division this year. So I'm not as worried about him. If I'm the one making the decisions, I'm not firing him after this year, unless, again, like a catastrophic, you're hosting the 9-8 Broncos in a playoff game and lose, pretty badly.
If Sean Payton badly outcoaches him, I could see that if like Sean Payton schemes and specific 4th down calls that work out. I could see like if you just look at the two of them in a head-to-head matchup and he just gets circles ran around him. I could see that. But outside of that, like, they're going to win a couple of these next few games right after this. I think it's Lions Bills this week, right?
Yes, it is.
The 3 games after that are Patriots, Jets, Patriots. Like, they should easily have at least 3 wins left in them. And if they beat this Lions team, like, they should be able to clean up the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like because they're 2 games back of the Chiefs that the 1 seed might be out of reach already. But seems like a 2 seed locked up that potentially, if they're resting dudes late, a rusty start to the playoffs could be a possibility. But I'm along with you that I doubt that McDermott gets fired this year. I think it could happen to Sirianni, especially with the A.J. Brown drama that seems to be peaking up right now.
Yeah. The other guy that I want to talk about real quick is Kevin Stefanski, because a lot of people want to put him on the hot seat. And this is why Stefanski won't be fired. The reason that Stefanski won't be fired is because the Browns organization is still not willing to admit that they made a mistake with the Deshaun Watson situation. And Kevin Stefanski with Baker Mayfield made the playoffs and won a playoff game. And so if you fire Stefanski, then what you are saying is not only did we make a mistake with Deshaun Watson, but also that Baker Mayfield is the reason that we won those playoff games, not Kevin Stefanski. And so that is why the Browns will not fire Kevin Stefanski. Especially, they've already said they're bringing in competition this year for the quarterback position. So I think that they'll be hard pressed to fire him. With that, I think that he has been by far of this long outstretched suffering for the Browns, despite that little blip in 2020, in the 2020-2021 season when they won a playoff game and nearly beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead in the divisional round. Mm-hmm. I think he has been by far the best coach that they've had during that time. And so I think that the Browns are going to hold on to him.
I would hope so if I was a Browns fan. Like, as a Steelers fan, my issue is I think Stefanski's really competent and can put together a really good run game and can, like, manage a team pretty dang well. And so if they fired him, I'd be elated as a Steelers fan. But, like, Stefanski is not the issue with that team. The GM and obviously the Deshaun Watson trade, disastrous. It seems like some of the injury luck has just been brutal. The Deshaun Watson whole situation seems like it's just a gray cloud over this team, that it wasn't Stefanski's fault necessarily. And I think if you're expecting Stefanski to fix Deshaun, like, that seemed like it was going to be a Herculean mental effort, and that, like, we know that Kevin Stefanski knows football and knows offense. Like, he's a good offensive play caller. But to say, like, hey, we need you to reprogram somebody who literally, like, seems like a terrible human being to everybody who's ever commented anything about his character. Like, it seems like he's terrible. He's in a terrible mental headspace. And his body's getting annihilated now, and it was already getting torn up before. Like, it just seems like it would be a Herculean effort to be able to not only coach this team that's been in disarray because of these vibes, but also to try and turn around somebody's mindset from the ground up. Like, that just seems unrealistic to me. And he didn't even make the decision for Deshaun. If he said, I want you to trade for Deshaun Watson, like, this is my nail in the coffin, like, I need to do this, I need you to do this, then it's like, okay, blame it on him, sure. But you thrust this man, you thrust Deshaun Watson on this man and traded away a bunch of assets for him, and all that to deteriorate what was a really good team that was ascending. And so I don't blame Kevin Stefanski for that, just as you said.
No. Now, I know that we were planning to talk about round 1 college football playoff matchups, but a little bit of breaking news reported by Pete Thamel and Chris Lowe, and that is that University of North Carolina officials are on board to hire Bill Belichick, and the two sides are just working out some things, including having to do with Belichick wants to hire his son, Steven, who's currently the Washington defensive coordinator, Also, North Carolina's NIL resources, Belichick's salary, and resources for staff and reporting structure are sort of the last few things that are getting figured out between Belichick and the North Carolina Tar Heels. Discussions have been ongoing for about a week. They're first reported by Adam Schefter, and Adam Schefter also reported that on Sunday, Belichick met with university officials for 5 hours on
Whoa.
Sunday. And so I feel like that was the pretty telling sign when that was reported by Schefter on Monday that this is going to happen. It's just a matter of how it works out, because it would be surprising if the university took all of that time to spend with him. He took all of that time to spend with them, while they could have been interviewing other candidates without this happening. So, Nick, what are your very first impressions about this? Bill Belichick is now a college head coach for the University of North Carolina Tar Heels.
We were talking about this a little before the show today. I feel like Belichick could be a really good coach in college. I feel like his ability to put together a team, that he builds teams correctly. He builds them inside out, good offensive line, good defensive line, really good schemes on the defense. I think as long as he's able to put together a good offensive coaching staff, as we were talking about with Gerard Mayo, I think that's really important. I think something that really stands out to me, if able to continue, would be if UNC can continue this lineage of really good QB play at the college level. I think Drake May the last couple years, really a good standout. I think Sam Howell before him. And I think they've had a number of pretty dang good wide receivers too. If you're able to furnish him with good offensive talent, if he's able to recruit good offensive players, I think that that's really going to put together a really balanced team that could really make a push in their conference. I think that something else that really pops for me, Belichick, it seemed like the great white whale that he was wanting to go after in the NFL was the all-time wins record. I think he was really trying to go for Shula's all-time wins record. And the jump to college, I feel like, just is a monumental shift in who we see Belichick as a person. I think if you're looking at him going to college, it's like, okay, either the NFL said, we're just not going to hire you, that nobody was going to hire him for any jobs, or it's that he just loves football so much that like he just wants to coach. And I think that that's a great reflection of him as a head coach, and that he really has shown to be a tremendous football savant for decades. And so I think that we should absolutely be celebrating him being in a position for a football team that should be a lot of fun to watch. I'm looking forward to seeing Belichick on the UNC sideline. So
I think that this is I think it's just going to be really, really interesting. So the way college football works when it comes to NIL and stuff like that, especially when a new coach is hired, is there's a new coach, and so there's excitement, and so there's an uptick in NIL. Because there's an uptick in NIL, the coach can go get players that maybe they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Because they get players, they play well, there's more uptick in NIL. And it's kind of that cycle. But that's typically a little bit of a process to get that going. Typically, it's like, okay, there's a small uptick in NIL because of the new coach and we're bought in, but then prove it, and then we'll like really start opening the wallets. But where I think UNC is going to be way ahead of the 8 ball with Bill Belichick is I think there are going to be a lot of players that are like, I want to play for Belichick because of who he is and what he's accomplished. And he went on the Pat McAfee show yesterday, and he went on right after Adam Schefter. And so so Pat and the gang, they got all of the information that they could from Adam Schefter, knowing Belichick, knowing he's not actually going to share anything. And so they then were just kind of asking, some stuff. And Belichick was very candid, like, if this happens, this is what my program is going to be like. And he said it's going to be a pipeline to the NFL. It'll be a program that is run like an NFL program so that players know exactly what they're getting into. He talked about the current landscape of college football is that players aren't really experiencing that because of basically it's unrestricted free agency every single year for every person on every team. And a lot of schools, a lot of coaches are like, hey, I'm putting this team together for this year. Hopefully we have success. Okay, next year I'm putting this team together. Hopefully we have success, instead of building a program. And I think that that's actually going to be a big draw for a lot of young guys that are looking to take advantage of that. I mean, I've seen that's a lot of what Fran Brown at Syracuse was preaching when he first took over, and we saw that this year. I think that's a lot of what Curt Cignetti was preaching when he took over Indiana, and I think there's actually, despite how much NIL and transfer portal and expanded playoff and all of that is trying to pull college football in this direction, I think we're seeing some new coaches coming in that are trying to pull it back the other way. And who knows? I hope they're successful, because I think that's better for college football. And who knows what we see in a few years in the landscape of college football. I think that Belichick could do a really, really good job because of just how fantastic of a coach he is. I think a lot of players are going to be bought into him and want to play for him. And so North Carolina might get some transfers that you're like, wait, typically guys are playing well enough at North Carolina so they can transfer to Auburn, transfer to LSU, transfer to Ole Miss. It's like, no, he's actually luring people away from those schools. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's a great hire for North Carolina. I think that the other thing, like you were talking about, sort of a change in Bill Belichick's ideas and his personality, and when it comes to the Don Shula wins record, I wonder if he's just kind of come to the realization, like, listen, whenever anybody asks who the greatest NFL head coach is of all time, they always say me, right? They always say me because I've won all the Super Bowls. They always say me. Even though Don Shula has won 28 more games than I have, like, this is how it is, right? And so maybe he's realized, like, you know what? I don't have anything else I need to prove at the NFL level. They didn't want me. I'm like, fine. I just really like to coach. I really love coaching. And so this is an opportunity for me to go coach. His dad was an assistant coach there when he was a kid, before his dad became the head coach at Navy for 50 plus years. Yep. So there's also that sort of cool tie-in of, like, I because of that, I imagine that this is a place that he goes until he retires, not a place that he goes just until he can get back into the NFL ranks. I think this is sort of this is my curtain call, kind of like Mac Brown, but I think he has been at North Carolina the last few years, but I think Bill Belichick will do a little bit of a better job than Mac Brown did. So I'm excited to see it. Syracuse plays North Carolina at home this next year. Syracuse is one of 6 Division I schools that has never, or Division I Power 5 schools that has never hosted College Game Day. And so hopefully, they'll be good enough, and North Carolina will be good enough, and it'll be Belichick's first year that it'll be worth game day coming to upstate New York. That would be really cool. Yeah. So
Yep. With Saban and Belichick together, oh my gosh, that would be so much fun. Because they used to coach together, I believe, back in Cleveland when Belichick was the head coach back in Cleveland many years ago.
Yep.
Oh my God, so much fun. I think Belichick, I'm stoked to just have him back in the game. He's a football personality. He's definitely a godfather of the modern game. And so super stoked for it. Did you want to talk anything else? We good?
Yeah, we can talk college football playoff later. We can do that. We still have an extra week before those first rounds.
We can just talk later about it.
Yeah. So
yep.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, for listening to us just talk about football, which we love to do. Mm-hmm. 2 guys, like you said, Nick, just with mics and cameras. Nothing special, but we like doing it. So thank you all so much for watching and for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. We love doing this, and we're so blessed to have y'all as listeners, as watchers. So have a great day, everybody.